Dear students, today we shall be talking about the carbon cycle. What are the key points about the carbon cycle? How carbon cycle operates in nature. Before proceeding, it is my request to you all to like and subscribe my channel while learning. First of all, we shall be talking about the key points about the carbon cycle. When we talk about the carbon cycle, it is an essential element of the bodies of the living organisms. It is also economically important to modern humans in the form of the fossil fuels. It has a slow geological process, including formation of the sedimentary rock and fossil fuels. It contributes to the carbon cycle over a long time scale. Some human activities such as burning of the fossil fuels and deforestation increase atmospheric carbon dioxide and affect Earth's climate and oceans. Carbon cycle is predominantly a gaseous cycle. It is predominantly a gaseous cycle with carbon dioxide as the main vehicle of flux between biotic and abiotic components. The major reservoirs of carbon include soils, sediments of aquatic ecosystems, the oceans, dissolved carbon compounds, plants and animal biomass, and even the atmosphere. The largest reservoir is sedimentary rock, such as limestone. However, this pool turns over very slowly. So, carbon cycle is predominantly a gaseous cycle, and carbon dioxide is the main vehicle of the flux between biotic and abiotic components. The major reservoirs include soil, sediments, aquatic ecosystems, oceans, dissolved carbon compounds, plant and animal biomass, and even the atmosphere. And the largest reservoir is sedimentary rock, such as limestone. However, this pool turns over very slowly. Carbon dioxide from atmosphere is taken up by the photosynthetic organisms and is used to make organic molecules which travel through food chains. In the end, the carbon atoms are released as carbon dioxide in the process of the respiration. So why is carbon important? It is important because it bonds easily with other elements. All living things contain carbon. It is the building block of the life on Earth, whether we see them in nucleic acids, RNA, DNA, amino acids, proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, hydrocarbons. That is why it is a primary component of the macromolecules as well. So when we talk about the carbon, which is a building block and fuel source, about 18% of our body contains carbon atoms by mass, and those carbon atoms are pretty key to our existence. Without carbon, we would not have the plasma membranes of our cells, the sugar molecules we use for fuel, or even DNA that carries instruction to build and run our body. So all these things contain carbon. That is why it is the building block and the fuel source. The carbon cycle is most easily studied as two interconnected subcycles. So one dealing with the rapid carbon exchange among animals, and one dealing with long-term cycling of the carbon through geological process. So one is a rapid one, that is wherein the carbon exchange among the living organisms takes place, and other process is long, wherein the cycling takes place through the geological processes. Organic molecules made by photosynthesizers are passed through food chains, and cellular respiration converts the organic carbon back into carbon dioxide gas. As a brief overview, carbon exists in air largely as carbon dioxide, which dissolves in water and reacts with water molecules to produce bicarbonate. And photosynthesis by land plants, bacteria, and algae convert carbon dioxide or bicarbonate into the organic molecules. The formation of fossil fuels, it happens as a slow geological time scale, but humans and other living organisms, they release carbon in the form of carbon dioxide at a very fast time scale. So long-term shortage of organic carbon occurs when matter from the living organisms is buried deep underground or sinks to the bottom of the ocean and forms sedimentary rock. So this is a long-term storage of organic carbon when the matter in the matter, that is the living organisms, they are buried deep underground or they sinks to the bottom of the ocean and form the sedimentary rocks. Volcanic activity and more recently human burning of the fossil fuels, they bring this very stored carbon back into the carbon cycle. So it is important to realize these cycles are linked. It is not that every cycle is playing independently. No, they are all linked. For instance, the same pools of atmospheric and oceanic carbon dioxide that are utilized by the organisms are also fed and depleted by the geological processes. Now, if we talk about the carbon dioxide in atmosphere, it comes into the atmosphere through the volcanic eruptions as well, or by the air sea exchange. This very carbon is added to the atmosphere by the human emissions, it means by the anthropogenic influence as well. The soil carbon, either it is in the form of the fossil carbon or the microbial respiration and decomposition takes place, which leaches or run off. It goes to the ocean sediments, and it can be again uplifted or utilized by the marine photosynthesis. So this is the cycle, how this very cycle plays an important role. When we talk about the biological carbon cycle, carbon enters all food webs through terrestrial and aquatic, through autotrophs or self-feeders. Almost all of these autotrophs, photosynthesizers, such as plants or algae. Autotrophs capture carbon dioxide from the air or bicarbonate ions from water and use them to make organic compounds such as glucose. And when we talk about the heterotrophs or other feeders, such as humans, they consume the organic molecules and the organic carbon is passed through the food chains and food webs. So the carbon in the atmosphere, so it is a carbon in the atmosphere which is taken up by the plants. The plants are eaten up by the primary consumers by the higher level consumers. Then it is a cellular respiration which takes place in them, and it is released into the atmosphere, or by the death and decay of the plants and animals, it is formed in the form of the detritus. They are acted upon by the detritivores, and they are again released into the atmosphere as the carbon dioxide. The carbons can cycle quickly through this very biological pathway, especially in aquatic ecosystems. Overall, an estimated 1000 to 1 lakh million metric tons of carbon move through the biological pathway every year. So for this very context, what we see that metric ton is about the weight of an elephant or a small car. So you can imagine that 1000 to 1 lakh million metric tons of the carbon move through the biological pathway every year. So you can see the importance of the biological pathway as well. How now the question arises that how does carbon cycle back to the atmosphere or ocean? So to release the energy stored in the carbon containing molecules such as sugars, autotrophs and heterotrophs break these molecules down. In the process we call it as the cellular respiration. In this process, the carbons of the molecules are released as carbon dioxide. Decomposers also release organic compounds and carbon dioxide when they break down dead organisms and waste products, as I have discussed in the last slide as well. The level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is influenced by the reservoir of carbon in the oceans and vice versa. Carbon dioxide from the atmosphere dissolves in water and reacts with water molecules in a kind of the reaction where in carbon dioxide, such as for example here carbon dioxide plus water, it forms the carbonic acid which in turn forms bicarbonate and which in turn forms carbonate which in turn forms the carbonate. So this kind of the reaction takes place in the geological carbon cycle. The geological pathway of the carbon cycle takes much longer than the biological pathway which was described earlier. So in fact it takes usually millions of the years for the carbon to cycle through the geological pathway. Carbon may be stored for long periods of time in the atmosphere, bodies of liquid water, mostly oceans, ocean sediments, soil, rock, fossil fuels, and Earth's interior. They are stored for a longer period of the time. The fossil fuels take millions of years to form. When humans burn them, carbon is released into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. And another way of the carbon to enter the atmosphere is by eruption of the volcanoes. Carbon containing sediments in the ocean floor are taken deep within the earth in a process called subduction. So the process of the subduction, where in the carbon containing sediments in the atmosphere in the ocean floor, they are taken deep inside. That very process is called as the subduction. And in which what happens in that, in which one tectonic plate moves over the other and the carbon gets trapped deep inside. This process forms carbon dioxide, which can be released into the atmosphere by volcanic eruptions or hydrothermal vents. The carbonate released in this process, it combines with calcium ions to form the calcium carbonate, which is a key component in the shells of the marine organisms as well. And when organisms die, their remains, they sink and eventually become part of the sediment on the ocean floor. And over the geological time, these sediments turn into the limestone, which is the largest carbon reservoir on Earth. And on land, carbon is stored in soil as organic carbon from the decomposition of living organisms, or as inorganic carbon from withering of the terrestrial rocks and minerals. And deeper under the ground, the fossil fuels such as oil, coal, natural gas, which are the remains of the plants decomposed under anaerobic oxygen conditions. And now, what are the human impacts of the impacts on the carbon cycle? One of the greatest impact is deforestation, that is cutting down of the forest. It is the major contributor to the increasing carbon dioxide. Trees and other parts of the forest ecosystem, they sequester carbon, and much of the carbon is released as carbon dioxide if the forests are cleared. The global demand for the Earth's limited fossil fuel reserves has risen since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And the fossil fuels are considered a non-renewable resource because they are being used up much faster than they can be produced by the geological process. So when the fossil fuels are burned, carbon dioxide is released into the air, and increasing the use of the fossil fuels has led to the elevated levels of the carbon dioxide. And some of the extra carbon dioxide that is produced by the human activities is taken up by the plants or absorbed by the ocean. But these processes do not fully counteract the increase. So atmospheric carbon dioxide levels have risen and continue to rise because of these very impacts. Now, what are those? Number one, excessive use of the fossil fuels, and secondly, clearing of the forest. And carbon dioxide levels naturally rise and fall in the cycles over long periods of time, but they are higher now than they have been in the past, and 400,000 years as shown in the graph. So this is the graph of the 400,000 years, wherein you can see that this was the carbon dioxide concentration in the parts per million about 4,000 years ago, and now at the present day it has crossed 375 parts per million, and that which is one of the important causes of the global warming as well. Why does it matter that there is a lot of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? Now I was talking about as the carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, and when in the atmosphere it traps heat and keeps it from radiating into the space. And based on the extensive evidence, scientists think that the elevated levels of the carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases are causing pronounced changes in the Earth's climate. So without decisive changes to reduce the emissions, Earth's temperature is projected to increase by 1 to 5 degrees centigrade by the year 2100. And also, while uptake of the excessive carbon dioxide by the oceans might seem good from the greenhouse gas perspective, it may not be good at all from the perspective of the sea life. If we take the sea life into account, that is not good. And the debate about the future effects of increasing the atmospheric carbon dioxide or the carbon on climate change, it focuses on the fossil fuels. However, scientists must take the natural processes such as volcanoes, plant growth, soil carbon levels, and respiration into account as they model and predict the future impact of this very increase. And as we have seen, carbon dioxide dissolved in seawater can react with water molecules to release hydrogen ions. So dissolving carbon dioxide in water causes water to become more and more acidic. So more acidic water can in turn reduce carbonate. They can reduce the carbonate concentrations and make it harder. So water will become more hard for the marine organisms to build and maintain their shells with the help of the calcium carbonate. So by increasing temperatures and higher acidity can harm the sea life, and it has also been linked to the coral bleaching as well. So herein you are seeing the picture that the corals, their color is fading. It is all because of the coral bleaching, because of the excessive increase in temperature and higher acidity. It is leading to the coral bleaching. So this was all about the carbon cycle. Next time we shall be dealing with the phosphorus cycle. Thank you very much.